Late one quiet evening in the stillness of their small home, baby Oliver, just 6 months old, paralyzed from the waist down, lay peacefully in his crib, unaware of the extraordinary events about to unfold. His parents, Grace and Tom Miller, were lost in their own world of exhaustion and routine, oblivious to the miracle that was about to change everything. Their family's tiny puppy, Charlie, however, wasn't so unaware. Acting strangely, he began pacing back and forth in the nursery, his small body tense and alert. Then, in the quiet of the night, Charlie did something so unexpected, so extraordinary, that it would leave the Millers speechless. Could a little puppy truly work a miracle? The Miller family's modest home on the outskirts of town was filled with warmth, but also with an overwhelming sense of fatigue. Grace and Tom had welcomed their son, Oliver, into their lives just 6 months ago, but the journey since his birth had been far from easy. Oliver had been born with a rare condition, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down, needing round-the-clock care and attention. As much as Grace and Tom adored their son, there were moments when they found themselves wondering if they were doing enough for him. Their days were a blur of doctor visits, therapy sessions, and sleepless nights. Grace, a compassionate nurse, had taken a leave of absence to focus on Oliver's needs, while Tom, a hard-working software engineer, balanced long hours at home to provide for the family. Despite the challenges, they clung to the little joys that life still offered, including the playful antics of their scrappy puppy, Charlie. They had found him abandoned in their backyard one crisp morning, and despite their initial hesitations, Grace insisted they keep him. She believed his boundless energy would bring a much-needed sense of normalcy to their chaotic lives, and she was right. Charlie quickly became a beacon of laughter and comfort in their home, forming a special bond with baby Oliver. Often, Charlie could be found lying beside the crib, his little tail wagging as he watched over Oliver with unwavering loyalty. One particular night, everything seemed unusually quiet. Grace had just put Oliver down to sleep, and after a long day, she finally allowed herself a brief moment to rest. Tom, equally exhausted, had dozed off on the couch in the nursery. The soft glow of the nightlight illuminated Oliver's peaceful face as he slept soundly. But Charlie was anything but peaceful. He paced back and forth around the crib, his ears twitching at every slight noise. Something was off. His behavior was unlike anything Grace and Tom had ever seen before. Without warning, Charlie let out a soft whine, his body taut with an urgency they hadn't noticed in him before. He was on high alert. Then, what happened next defied all explanation. In the stillness of that night, Charlie's instincts took over in a way that would not only save Oliver's life, but would also leave the Millers wondering if miracles were real. The following morning started like any other. Grace, still groggy from her interrupted rest, made her way to Oliver's nursery to check on him. She found Charlie curled up next to the crib, his eyes wide and watchful, as though he had been keeping guard all night. Grace smiled at the sight. Charlie had become Oliver's little protector, always by his side. But as she leaned over to lift Oliver from the crib, her smile faded. Oliver's face was flushed, and his small body felt warm to the touch. Panic began to rise in her chest as she quickly checked his temperature. It was dangerously high. Her instincts, honed from years of nursing, kicked in. She called out to Tom, who rushed into the room, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "Tom, we need to take him to the hospital," Grace said, her voice trembling. "Something's not right." Within minutes, they were in the car, speeding toward the nearest emergency room. Charlie, sensing the urgency, barked anxiously, scratching at the door as if pleading to go with them. At the hospital, doctors and nurses swarmed around Oliver, running tests and checking vitals. Grace held tightly to Tom's hand, her mind racing with fears of what could be wrong. Had they missed something? Was Oliver's condition worsening? After what felt like an eternity, the doctor finally approached them. "Oliver has a severe fever, but we've caught it early," he explained. "We'll need to monitor him closely. With his condition, even a small infection can escalate quickly." Grace nodded, her heart pounding. They were used to the constant worry that came with Oliver's condition, but it never got any easier. They remained at the hospital for hours, hovering over their baby as he rested in a small bed, his tiny chest rising and falling with each strained breath. By evening, Oliver's fever had subsided, and the doctors felt it was safe for them to return home. Exhausted but relieved, the Millers bundled their son and headed back to their quiet house. As they entered, Charlie was waiting by the door, his tail wagging excitedly. Grace gave him a gentle pat, grateful for his steady presence. That night, after putting Oliver to bed, Grace and Tom collapsed onto the couch, emotionally and physically drained. "We're doing everything we can, right?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Grace met his gaze, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Yes," she replied firmly. "We're giving him all the love and care he needs. That's all we can do." Charlie, ever the faithful companion, trotted over to them and settled between them on the couch. Grace absent-mindedly scratched behind his ears, finding comfort in his warm, furry presence. What they didn't know was that Charlie was about to prove just how indispensable he truly was. Around midnight, the peaceful quiet of the house was shattered by a soft, high-pitched whine. Charlie had stationed himself by Oliver's crib, as he often did, keeping a watchful eye over the sleeping baby. But now, something had caught his attention. His ears perked up, his body stiffened, and he let out another soft whine. Oliver's breathing had changed. It was subtle, but Charlie noticed. The baby's chest rose and fell unevenly, and a faint raspy sound escaped his tiny mouth. Charlie's whines grew more urgent as he paced frantically around the crib. Finally, he let out a sharp bark that echoed through the quiet house. Tom sprang awake, his heart racing. "What was that?" he mumbled, shaking Grace awake. Another bark rang out, louder this time. "It's coming from Oliver's room," Grace exclaimed, leaping to her feet. The couple rushed down the hallway, their hearts pounding in fear. When they entered the nursery, the sight that greeted them froze them in their tracks. Oliver was still in his crib, but his face was pale and his small body twitched. His breathing was shallow and his lips had turned a faint shade of blue. "Tom, call 911, Grace shouted, scooping Oliver into her arms. She patted his back gently, trying to stimulate his breathing, her mind racing through every piece of medical knowledge she could recall. Tom grabbed his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed. Meanwhile, Charlie stood beside Grace, barking insistently, as if urging them to act faster. By the time the paramedics arrived, Oliver's breathing had stabilized, thanks to Grace's quick thinking. The EMTs praised her for her calmness, but she shook her head. "It wasn't me," she said, glancing down at Charlie. "If he hadn't alerted us, we might not have woken up in time." The paramedics rushed Oliver to the hospital for further monitoring, and Grace and Tom followed closely behind, shaken to their core. At the hospital, the doctors reassured the Millers that Oliver was stable. He likely had a brief episode of apnea, one explained. It's not uncommon in infants with his condition, but it can be dangerous if not addressed immediately. Grace and Tom exchanged a look, their emotions a blend of relief and lingering fear. They had always known that Oliver's condition required constant vigilance, but that night had shown them just how fragile life could be, and how, Even the smallest member of their family could make the most significant difference. Tom crouched beside Grace, both of them watching Charlie as he continued to fixate on Oliver. The air in the room seemed to thicken with concern, and the couple exchanged a worried glance. "Do you think he senses something?" Tom asked, his voice low and unsure. "I don't know," Grace replied, her voice barely a whisper. "But after what happened last time, I'm not taking any chances." That night, Grace and Tom made a decision. They would stay awake, taking turns to keep an eye on Oliver. Charlie, ever vigilant, remained by the crib, his small dark form a shadow in the dimly lit room. Hours passed in stillness, the faint sound of Oliver's soft breaths, the only noise, and the couple began to relax. Perhaps they had been overreacting, they thought. But then, just as the clock struck midnight, Oliver stirred in his crib, letting out a soft, muffled cry. Grace's instincts kicked in immediately. She leaned over to check on him, her heart sinking as she saw his shallow, irregular breathing. Panic surged within her as she scooped Oliver into her arms, gently patting his back, trying to help him breathe more steadily. "Tom, we need to go back to the hospital," she said urgently, her voice trembling. Tom sprang into action, grabbing the diaper bag and keys. Within moments, they were rushing out the door, with Charlie barking frantically behind them, his sharp cries echoing in the quiet night. It was as if he knew again that Oliver needed help. At the hospital, doctors ran tests to understand what was causing Oliver's recurrent episodes. Grace and Tom sat together, anxiety building with each passing minute. Their minds raced through worst-case scenarios, but they both knew that Charlie's actions had been their warning, just enough time to react. Hours later, a pediatric specialist approached them with a clipboard in hand, his expression calming. "We've identified the issue," he began, offering a reassuring smile. "Oliver has a condition called central apnea. It's rare, where the brain occasionally forgets to send signals to the muscles that control breathing. It's not uncommon in infants with neurological conditions like Oliver's." Grace exhaled, a mixture of relief and new concern flooding her. At least now they had an explanation, but the diagnosis was a stark reminder of the road ahead. "The good news is that it's manageable," the doctor continued. "We'll provide you with a breathing monitor that will alert you if there's an issue. It'll give you peace of mind and help you act quickly." Tom squeezed Grace's hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. Back home, they set up the monitor in Oliver's nursery. Despite the new safety measure, Charlie stayed as vigilant as ever, never leaving Oliver's side. The puppy seemed to know that his responsibility was far more than just companionship. It was as though his instincts had evolved beyond simple care. Soon, the Millers began to notice even more remarkable behavior from Charlie. He seemed to possess an uncanny ability to sense Oliver's needs before the monitor would even alert them. One afternoon, as Grace was preparing lunch, Charlie's insistent barking caught her attention. Rushing to the nursery, she found Oliver lying awkwardly, his leg wedged between the crib slats. He wasn't crying, but had Charlie not alerted her, the position could have caused harm. "Good boy, Charlie," Grace murmured, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You're our little guardian angel." As news of Charlie's extraordinary actions spread among friends and family, Grace's sister, a veterinarian, was particularly intrigued. "You should consider having him evaluated," she suggested. "With instincts like those, he might be a great candidate to be a service dog." The idea took root in Grace's mind. Could they really train Charlie to provide even more support for Oliver? The thought filled her with a sense of hope, a potential beacon for their challenging journey. As the days went by, the Millers found a new rhythm. The monitor offered an extra layer of reassurance, but it was Charlie's presence that truly brought them peace. His every bark, whine, and wag of the tail seemed to say, "I'm here. I've got this." Yet, the sense that Charlie's purpose was far from fulfilled grew stronger with each passing day. They had no idea how profound his role in their lives would become, or how it would change their future. That evening, as they tucked Oliver into bed, Grace felt a lingering thought tugging at her. There was something more about Charlie's presence, something she still hadn't fully understood. Sitting beside him as he curled up by the crib, she softly stroked his fur. "You've been watching over him all this time, haven't you?" she murmured. Charlie licked her hand, his eyes full of unspoken understanding, as if answering her silent question. In the days that followed, Grace and Tom began to piece together more of the puzzle. They used the photographs and clues from the mysterious letter to uncover bits of Carla's life. They discovered that Carla had been a loving mother who'd made a heartbreaking decision in hopes of giving Oliver a better chance. But the question that remained, why had Charlie chosen to stay behind with Oliver? What connection did he have to Carla, and what was his role in their lives moving forward? The answers, they knew, would come in time. But for now, they were simply grateful for the miracle of Charlie's presence, for the unexpected bond he had formed with Oliver, and for the way he had shown them that sometimes the smallest guardian can make the biggest difference. "I remember her," the nurse said, her voice soft but clear. She was young, probably in her early 20s. She came in alone and you could tell she was struggling, but she was so sweet, always asking about her baby and making sure he was okay. Grace's heart ached at the thought of Carla, alone in that hospital room, anxious about her baby's future. "Do you remember anything else? Did she mention where she was staying or if she had any family?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. The nurse hesitated for a moment, her gaze distant. "She mentioned staying at a friend's house, but she didn't give any details. She was very private, like she didn't want anyone to know too much about her situation." That evening, Grace shared the conversation with Tom. "It's not much, but at least we know she cared deeply about Oliver," she said, trying to find solace in the nurse's words. She wasn't abandoning him out of neglect. She did it out of love. Tom nodded, his expression pensive. "It makes me wonder what kind of life she had before all of this. What led her to a point where she felt she had no other choice?" In the midst of their search for answers, life at home continued its rhythm. Oliver was growing stronger each day, his laughter filling the house with joy. The breathing monitor, though still a constant presence, gave Grace and Tom confidence in their new roles as parents. Charlie, too, was thriving. The scruffy stray puppy had transformed into a healthy, energetic dog with a shiny coat and a wagging tail that never seemed to stop. His bond with Oliver was unshakable. They were practically inseparable. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, a knock on the door startled them. Charlie barked sharply, his ears perking up as he ran toward the door. Tom opened it to reveal an elderly woman standing on the porch, holding a small package. Her kind eyes scanned the room, finally settling on Charlie. "You must be the Millers," she said, her voice warm but tinged with sadness. "I'm Carla's aunt." The woman, who introduced herself as Margaret, explained that she had raised Carla after her parents passed away. "Carla was always so full of life," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "But when she found out about Oliver's condition, it broke her. She felt like she had failed him somehow." Margaret handed Grace the package, which contained more photos of Carla and Oliver, along with a small notebook filled with Carla's handwritten notes. "She wanted you to have this," Margaret said softly. She told me that if anything ever happened to her, you were the only one she trusted. Grace and Tom sat in stunned silence as they flipped through the notebook. It was filled with Carla's thoughts, reflections, and, most poignantly, her deep love for Oliver. One entry caught Grace's eye. "I don't know if I'll ever be strong enough to be the mother he deserves, but I know that Grace and Tom will love him like their own. And Charlie will make sure he's never alone." That night, as Grace sat by Oliver's crib, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in months. Carla's words gave her the closure she so desperately needed. She knew now that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Charlie curled up at her feet, let out a contented sigh. Grace stroked his fur and whispered, "You're part of this family too, and we're so lucky to have you." The arrival of Margaret and the discovery of Carla's notebook provided a sense of closure for the Millers, but it also opened the door to new questions and challenges. As Grace and Tom continued to piece together Carla's story, they realized there was more to uncover about her life and decisions. One particular entry in the notebook stood out to Grace. "There's a shelter in town where they've always been kind to me. It's where I found Charlie. They took us in when we had nowhere else to go. If something ever happens, I hope they'll remember us." The next morning, Grace decided to visit the shelter mentioned in Carla's notes. She called ahead, explaining her connection to Carla and Charlie, and the staff eagerly agreed to meet her. When she arrived, she was greeted by a kind woman named Linda, who had worked at the shelter for years. "Carla and Charlie stayed here for a few weeks," Linda recalled as they sat in the shelter's modest office. "She was so young and scared, but she adored that puppy. She said he was the only thing keeping her going." Grace's heart broke at the thought of Carla finding comfort in Charlie during such a difficult time. "Do you know why she left, or where she went after?" she asked gently. Linda shook her head. "She didn't say much about her plans, but I do remember her mentioning that she hoped to find a family for Charlie if she couldn't care for him anymore. She wanted him to be safe, no matter what." As Grace prepared to leave, Linda handed her a small envelope. "Carla left this behind. She said I should keep it, hoping that one day someone would come looking for her." Inside the envelope was a photograph of Carla and Charlie taken at the shelter. On the back, Carla had written a simple note, "Thank you for giving me hope when I needed it most." Back at home, Grace shared her discoveries with Tom. "It's clear that Carla loved Oliver and Charlie deeply," she said, her voice filled with empathy. "But it's also clear that she felt completely alone. I wish we could have been there for her sooner." Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe there's a way we can honor her memory," he said after a pause, "by helping others who are in similar situations." Grace's eyes lit up. "What if we started a fund in Carla's name? Something to support single parents or families with special needs, children?" Tom smiled, pride in his voice. "That's a perfect way to keep her spirit alive." As they began to explore the logistics of creating the fund, they encountered an unexpected challenge: raising awareness and gathering support. They knew they couldn't do it alone, so they turned to their friends, family, and local community for help. One evening, as they brainstormed ideas for a fundraiser, Tom suggested involving Charlie. "Everyone loves a good dog story," he said with a grin. "Let's share Charlie's journey and show people how much he's changed our lives." Grace loved the idea, and they quickly got to work creating a social media campaign featuring photos and videos of Charlie and Oliver. They shared the story of how Charlie had been a part of Carla's life and how he had become an integral part of their family. The response was overwhelming. Within days, their post went viral, and donations began to pour in, quickly gaining momentum. One comment in particular caught Grace's attention. I knew Carla. She was my neighbor for a while. She used to talk about wanting to give her son the best life possible. She would be so proud of what you're doing." As the fundraiser grew, the Millers began to notice subtle changes in Charlie's behavior. He seemed more energetic and playful, as though he could sense the positivity surrounding their efforts. Oliver, too, was thriving, his laughter filling the house as he and Charlie played together. But even amidst the joy, there were still moments of uncertainty. One evening, as Grace rocked Oliver to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that Carla's story wasn't entirely over. "What if there's more we don't know?" she asked Tom later that night. "What if there's someone else out there who loved her and wants to know what happened?" Tom placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll keep looking," he said gently. "For now, let's focus on what we can do for Oliver and for Charlie." The next day, they received an unexpected visit from a journalist who had heard about their fundraiser. "I'd love to write a feature on your story," the journalist said. "It could inspire so many people." Grace and Tom hesitated at first, unsure about opening their lives to public scrutiny. But as they considered the potential impact, they realized it was an opportunity to reach even more people. The article, titled "From Stray to Savior: How a Puppy Changed One Family's Life," was published in a local newspaper and quickly gained national attention. People from all walks of life reached out, sharing their own stories of resilience and hope. Through it all, Charlie remained a constant source of comfort and joy, proving time and again that he was no longer just a pet, but a hero in his own right. One afternoon, as Grace watched Oliver toddle around the backyard with Charlie by his side, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. "We're so lucky to have him," she said softly. "He's more than just a dog. He's a reminder of everything Carla wanted for Oliver." Tom nodded, wrapping an arm around her. "And he's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always a light." As the fundraiser gained traction, the Millers found themselves juggling their growing responsibilities with the emotional weight of Carla's story. Grace, in particular, felt torn between her desire to honor Carla's memory and her uncertainty about how much of Carla's life they should reveal to the public. One evening, as Grace sat in the nursery with Oliver asleep in her arms, Tom joined her, holding a folder filled with messages from donors and supporters. "People are asking about Carla's story," he said gently. "Some want to know more about her life, her struggles. They think it could inspire others." Grace frowned, her gaze fixed on Oliver's peaceful face. "I want to share her story, but I don't want it to feel exploitative," she said. "She was so private. What if we're crossing a line?" Tom nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe we don't need to share every detail," he said. "We can focus on her love for Oliver and her strength in making such a difficult decision. That's what matters most." The couple decided to consult Margaret, Carla's aunt, who had become a supportive presence in their lives. Over tea in the Millers' cozy kitchen, Grace shared their concerns. Carla was a private person, Margaret agreed, but she also wanted Oliver to have the best life possible. If sharing her story can help others and keep her memory alive, I think she would have wanted that. Encouraged by Margaret's words, Grace and Tom carefully crafted a narrative that highlighted Carla's courage and love without delving into the more painful aspects of her past. They shared their draft with Margaret, who approved it with a tearful smile. As the story spread, the Millers began receiving messages from single parents, foster families, and even former adoptees who found hope and encouragement in Carla's journey. Grace and Tom were touched by the outpouring of support, but they also felt the weight of the responsibility they had taken on. One message, in particular, stood out. "I was in a similar situation to Carla. I had to make the heartbreaking decision to give my child up for adoption. Reading your story has given me hope that he's living a good life. Thank you for sharing." Grace read the message aloud to Tom, her voice breaking with emotion. "It's incredible to think that Carla's story is helping others," she said, "but it's also a reminder of how many people are struggling." Meanwhile, Charlie's role in the family continued to evolve. He seemed to sense the emotional weight of the moment, often lying quietly by Grace's feet as she read messages from supporters or worked on plans for the fund. At other times, he would nudge her hand with his nose or place a paw on her lap as if to say, "I'm here for you." One afternoon, as Grace sat in the living room organizing fundraiser details, Charlie suddenly ran to the front door and barked. Grace opened the door to find a young woman standing on the porch, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice trembling. "I saw your story online, and I felt like I had to come. My name is Emily, and I knew Carla." Emily explained that she had met Carla at the shelter where she had stayed with Charlie. "We became friends," Emily said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "She talked about you, about how she thought you'd be the perfect family for Oliver. She was so scared, but she always said that she wanted the best for him." Grace listened intently, tears streaming down her face. "Did she ever talk about why she left?" she asked. Emily nodded, her own eyes brimming with emotion. "She felt like she wasn't enough for him," she said, "but she loved him more than anything. She used to say that Charlie was her way of staying connected to him." The conversation with Emily brought Grace a sense of closure, but it also deepened her resolve to make the fund a success. She and Tom began planning a community event to raise awareness and support for single parents and families in need. They decided to call it Carla's Legacy. The event was held in the local park on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Families gathered to enjoy food, games, and live music, and Charlie quickly became the star of the show. Children laughed as they played fetch with him, and adults smiled as they heard his story. As the event drew to a close, Grace took the stage to thank everyone for their support. With Oliver in her arms and Charlie at her feet, she spoke from the heart about Carla's courage and the importance of community. Carla believed in the power of love and kindness. She gave us the greatest gift we could ever ask for, and we want to honor her by giving back to others. Thank you for helping us keep her legacy alive." The crowd erupted in applause, and Grace felt a sense of peace wash over her. She looked down at Charlie, who wagged his tail and bent as if to say, "We did it." The success of Carla's legacy brought an overwhelming sense of accomplishment to the Millers, but it also brought new attention to their story, attention that came with unexpected complications. News outlets began contacting them, requesting interviews and exclusive features. Grace and Tom were cautious, wanting to protect Oliver's privacy while also keeping the fund in the spotlight for a good cause. One evening, as they reviewed their upcoming commitments, Tom received a call from an unknown number. He hesitated before answering, but the voice on the other end quickly caught his attention. "Mr. Miller, my name is Dr. Sylvia Green," the voice said. "I'm a psychologist who worked with Carla at the shelter. I've been following your story, and I believe I have something that might interest you." Tom's curiosity was piqued. "What is it, Dr. Green?" he asked. "I have some of Carla's personal writings, letters she wrote but never sent," Dr. Green explained. "She wanted Oliver to have them one day, but she wasn't sure how or when to pass them along. I think now might be the right time." The next morning, Grace and Tom met Dr. Green at her office. The psychologist, a kind woman with a calming presence, handed them a small, worn journal tied with a piece of string. Carla wrote about her hopes for Oliver and her struggles, Dr. Green said. She wanted him to know how much she loved him. Grace's hands trembled as she untied the string and opened the journal. The first page bore a simple inscription. "To my son Oliver, I hope these words help you understand how much you've always meant to me." As they read through the journal later that evening, the Millers were struck by Carla's raw honesty and unshakable love for her son. One passage stood out in particular. "I hope you grow up knowing that you were never a burden but a blessing. I wasn't strong enough to give you the life you deserve, but I found a family who could. They are my greatest gift to you, just as you were my greatest gift to the world." Grace wiped away tears as she read the passage aloud. She loved him so much, she said softly. "I wish she could see how happy he is now." The journal also revealed a side of Carla that the Millers hadn't known, a side filled with dreams and aspirations. She had written about wanting to become a nurse, inspired by Grace's kindness during her hospital stay. She had also dreamed of opening her own shelter for women and children in need, a safe haven where no one would feel as alone as she had. Tom closed the journal with a deep sigh. "We need to make her dream a reality," he said. "Not just for Oliver, but for Carla." Grace nodded. "Let's expand the fund," she said. "We can use it to support shelters and programs that help single parents and children." As they began planning the next phase of Carla's legacy, a new challenge emerged. A reporter from a national news outlet reached out, expressing interest in doing a feature on their story. While the Millers saw this as an opportunity to raise awareness, they were also wary of exposing their family to public scrutiny. After much deliberation, they agreed to the interview, setting clear boundaries to protect Oliver's privacy. The journalist, a compassionate woman named Leah, spent a day with the Millers, documenting their journey and the impact of Carla's legacy. During the interview, Leah asked about Charlie's role in their lives. "He's more than just a dog," Grace said with a smile. "He's a guardian, a companion, and a reminder of Carla's love." Leah's article, titled "From Struggle to Strength: How a Family Turned Tragedy into Hope," was published a week later. It garnered widespread attention, bringing an influx of donations to Carla's legacy. But with the newfound support came an unexpected twist. One afternoon, as Grace was organizing donation records, she received a letter in the mail. The envelope was plain and unmarked, but the contents left her stunned. Inside was a handwritten note that read, "Carla was brave to leave Oliver with you, but there's more to her story than you know. If you want the truth, meet me at the shelter where she stayed." The note was unsigned, and Grace couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it gave her. She showed it to Tom, who shared her concerns but also felt they couldn't ignore it. The next day, they visited the shelter together. Linda, the staff member who had helped them before, was surprised to see them again. When Grace explained the note, Linda's expression turned serious. "I don't know who sent this," Linda said, but Carla did mention that she was worried about someone from her past finding her. She didn't go into details, but it seemed like she was running from something, or someone. The revelation added a layer of mystery to Carla's story. Who was she running from? And why had someone chosen now to reveal this information? As Grace and Tom left the shelter, they couldn't shake the feeling that their journey with Carla's legacy was far from over. The anonymous note left Grace and Tom on edge. Who would send such a message, and why now? Grace couldn't stop replaying the words in her mind. "There's more to her story than you know." The statement felt ominous, yet intriguing, as if it were leading them to uncover a part of Carla's life that had remained hidden. The next morning, Tom suggested taking a cautious approach. "We should involve Linda," he said. She knows the shelter staff and might be able to give us more context about Carla's time there." Grace agreed, and they returned to the shelter that afternoon. Linda, already aware of their concerns, had done some digging of her own. "There's one person Carla was particularly close to here," Linda said. "A woman named Rachel. They often talked late into the night. Rachel might know more about what Carla was going through." Linda helped arrange a meeting with Rachel, who was now living in transitional housing provided by the shelter. When Grace and Tom arrived, Rachel greeted them warmly but with visible hesitation. "I wasn't sure if I should talk about Carla," Rachel admitted. "She was so private about her past, but if it helps you understand her better, I'll share what I know." As they sat together in a small sunlit room, Rachel recounted her memories of Carla. "She was one of the strongest people I've ever met," Rachel said, "but she was carrying a lot of pain. She told me she'd escaped a toxic relationship. The man she was with, he was controlling and manipulative. She left to protect Oliver." Grace's heart sank. "Do you think he could be the reason she didn't want to raise Oliver herself?" she asked. Rachel nodded. "She didn't feel safe. She was always looking over her shoulder, afraid he'd find her." This revelation added a new layer to Carla's story. Grace and Tom now understood that her decision to leave Oliver wasn't just about financial struggles. It was about ensuring his safety. "She was braver than we ever realized," Grace said quietly. As they left Rachel's home, Grace felt a renewed sense of purpose. "We need to do more than just honor Carla's memory," she told Tom. "We need to make sure no one else has to go through what she did." Their conversation inspired a new initiative within Carla's legacy, a fund specifically for survivors of domestic abuse. They reached out to local organizations and began building partnerships to provide resources for women and children in need. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, and volunteers stepped forward to help. One of the most touching moments came when a former shelter resident, inspired by Carla's story, offered to share her own experience at a community event. Her bravery moved the audience to tears and reinforced the importance of the fund. Meanwhile, Charlie's bond with Oliver continued to grow. The little boy, now more energetic and curious, spent hours playing with the loyal puppy. One day, as Grace watched them from the kitchen window, she noticed something extraordinary. Oliver, who had been hesitant to stand on his own, was using Charlie for support. "Tom, come look," she called, her voice filled with emotion. Together they watched as Oliver took his first tentative steps, holding on to Charlie's fur for balance. "It's a miracle," Grace whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Charlie's done more for Oliver than we ever could have imagined." The heartwarming moment reaffirmed the Millers' belief that Carla had made the right choice in trusting them with Oliver. "She must have known we'd need Charlie to help complete our family," Tom said. But as they celebrated Oliver's progress, the mystery of the anonymous note lingered in the background. Who had sent it, and why? Grace couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to uncover. One evening, as the Millers were winding down after a long day, their doorbell rang. Grace opened the door to find a man standing on the porch. He was middle-aged, with tired eyes and a nervous demeanor. "Mrs. Miller," he asked, "I'm not sure if you'll want to hear this, but I need to tell you something about Carla." Grace hesitated but invited him inside. The man introduced himself as David, Carla's former landlord. "I've been following the news about Carla's legacy," he said. "I recognized her name and I thought you should know. I'm the one who helped her leave." David explained that Carla had come to him in desperation, seeking a safe place to stay while she figured out her next steps. "She was terrified," he said. "She didn't want to tell me much, but I could tell she was running from someone." Grace listened intently as David described how he had helped Carla find the shelter and provided her with the resources to start over. She was determined to give Oliver a better life, David added. She even mentioned you once. She said she'd seen you at the hospital and knew you were the right person to care for him. David's account confirmed what Grace and Tom had suspected. Carla's actions were driven by love and a fierce desire to protect her son. "Thank you for telling us this," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "It means so much to know how much she cared." As David left, Grace felt a sense of closure. The pieces of Carla's story were finally coming together, and her bravery shone through in every detail. Despite the clarity provided by David's account, the Millers couldn't shake the weight of Carla's past. The revelation of her struggles with domestic abuse and her courageous escape filled Grace and Tom with a mix of admiration and sorrow. It was a poignant reminder of the sacrifices Carla had made to protect Oliver and the risks she had taken to ensure his future. But the mysterious letter still loomed in the background, unanswered. Its ominous tone suggested there was more to the story. Grace and Tom debated whether to pursue the lead further. While part of them longed to close the chapter for good, another part couldn't ignore the possibility that someone might still be out there with ill intentions toward Oliver, or even Carla's memory. One evening, while Grace was reviewing the latest donations and progress reports for Carla's legacy, Tom entered the room holding a file. "Grace," he began hesitantly, "I think I found something." Tom had been researching Carla's past, trying to trace the potential danger she might have been running from. Using details from David and Rachel's accounts, he dug into public records and found something chilling. A restraining order Carla had filed years earlier against a man named Brian Dempsey, Oliver's biological father. Grace's breath caught. "Do you think he's the one behind the letter?" she asked. Tom nodded grimly. "It's possible. He has a history of manipulation. If he's discovered where Oliver is, we need to be prepared." The Millers decided to reach out to a legal expert for advice. Their attorney, Sarah, reviewed the restraining order and the custody documents Carla had left. "Legally, Oliver is fully yours," Sarah reassured them. "But if this man decides to challenge your custody, even without grounds, it could create turmoil for your family." Grace's stomach churned. "What can we do to protect Oliver?" she asked. "Be proactive," Sarah advised. "File a protective order and inform the authorities about the letter. If Brian Dempsey is involved, they'll need to investigate his intentions." As the Millers took these precautionary steps, they also leaned on their community for support. Grace confided in Linda and Rachel, who offered their unwavering encouragement. "You're doing the right thing," Linda said. "Carla trusted you with Oliver, and you're honoring that trust by fighting for him." Meanwhile, Charlie's behavior became more vigilant. The loyal puppy, who had already proven his protective instincts, seemed to sense the tension in the household. He began sleeping by Oliver's crib at night and barking at the slightest unfamiliar sound. "It's like he knows something's coming," Grace observed. One rainy afternoon, the Millers received a call that sent their anxiety into overdrive. It was from a private investigator they'd hired to gather more information about Brian. "We've located him," the investigator said. "He's living just a few towns over." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. "Has he tried to contact us?" she asked. "Not directly," the investigator replied. "But it's clear he's been asking questions about Oliver and your family." The news left the Millers reeling. Tom paced the living room, his mind racing. "We can't let this man disrupt Oliver's life," he said firmly. "He gave up his rights the moment he abandoned Carla and their son." Grace nodded, her resolve hardening. "We need to be ready for whatever comes next." As they braced themselves for a potential confrontation, the Millers found strength in each other and their community. They organized a gathering at the shelter to rally support for Carla's legacy and raise awareness about the challenges faced by survivors of domestic abuse. The event was a resounding success, drawing attendees from all walks of life who were inspired by Carla's story and the Millers' commitment to her memory. During the event, Rachel approached Grace with a nervous expression. "I think I saw someone watching from the parking lot," she said quietly. "It could be nothing, but—" Grace's heart skipped a beat. She scanned the crowd but saw no one suspicious. Still, the possibility of Brian being nearby heightened her vigilance. Later that night, as the family returned home, the atmosphere was tense. Charlie's ears perked up as they entered the house, his nose twitching as if sensing something unusual. "Do you hear that?" Grace whispered to Tom. A faint noise came from the backyard, a rustling sound, followed by a low creak. Tom grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped outside with Charlie by his side. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground slick and muddy. As Tom scanned the yard, he noticed footprints leading toward the side gate. His grip on the flashlight tightened as Charlie growled softly, his body tense and alert. "Grace, call the police," Tom said, his voice steady but urgent. Inside, Grace dialed 911, her hands trembling. She kept Oliver close, her heart pounding as she waited for the authorities to arrive. Outside, Tom and Charlie followed the trail of footprints to the edge of the property, where they found a piece of torn fabric caught on the fence. When the police arrived, they conducted a thorough search but found no sign of an intruder. "Whoever it was, they're gone now," the officer said, "but we'll increase patrols in the area to keep an eye out." The incident left the Millers shaken but more determined than ever to protect their family. Grace looked at Oliver, who was blissfully unaware of the danger that had crept so close to their home. "We won't let anything happen to you," she whispered, holding him tightly. As they prepared for bed that night, Tom placed the torn fabric in a plastic bag, intending to have it analyzed for fingerprints. Charlie curled up by the crib, his watchful eyes scanning the room. The next morning, Grace and Tom sat at the kitchen table, reviewing their options. The torn fabric from the fence sat in a sealed plastic bag on the counter, a stark reminder of the potential threat still looming over them. "This can't just be a coincidence," Grace said, her voice steady but resolute. "If Brian is lurking around, we need to confront this head-on." Tom nodded, his expression serious. "But we need to be smart about it. We can't let him manipulate the situation or put Oliver in danger." That afternoon, the private investigator called with an update. "The fabric you found matches the description of a jacket Brian's been seen wearing," he explained. "It's likely he's been trying to get close, either to see Oliver or intimidate you." Grace felt a shiver run down her spine. "Do we have enough to involve the authorities?" she asked. "Yes," the investigator replied. "I've already provided the police with evidence of his recent behavior and his past restraining order. They're preparing to issue a warrant to question him." The Millers took every precaution in the following days. They installed security cameras around the property and coordinated with the police for regular patrols. Grace also reached out to their attorney, Sarah, who advised them to file a restraining order against Brian to establish additional legal protection. But as days passed, the tension in the household grew. Charlie remained hypervigilant, barking at every sound and pacing restlessly at night. "He knows something's not right," Tom said, watching the puppy as he stood by the front window, his ears perked. One evening, as the family prepared for dinner, the doorbell rang. Grace and Tom exchanged a weary glance. "Are we expecting anyone?" Grace asked, scooping Oliver into her arms. Tom shook his head. "Stay here," he said, moving cautiously toward the door. Charlie followed closely, his low growl rumbling in his throat. When Tom opened the door, he froze. Standing on the porch was Brian Dempsey, his hands stuffed into the pockets of a weather jacket. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Brian said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. I need to see my son." Tom stepped outside, closing the door behind him but leaving it slightly ajar. "You gave up that right when you abandoned him," Tom said firmly. "What are you doing here?" Brian's eyes flicked to the window, where he could see Grace holding Oliver. "I made mistakes," he admitted. "But I've changed. I just want a chance to explain myself." Grace, watching from inside, felt a surge of anger. How dare he show up unannounced after everything Carla went through, she thought. She handed Oliver to Linda, who was visiting to help with dinner, and stepped outside to join Tom. "You don't get to waltz back into his life after abandoning him and Carla," Grace said, her voice sharp. "Do you have any idea what she went through to protect him from you?" Brian flinched at her words. "I didn't know how bad things had gotten for her," he said. "I made mistakes, but I want to make amends." Before Grace could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. 2 police cars pulled up to the curb, their lights flashing. Officers stepped out and approached the porch. "Mr. Dempsey," one of them said, "we need to speak with you." Brian looked startled but didn't resist as the officers escorted him to one of the cars. "This isn't over," he said, his gaze lingering on Grace and Tom. "I'll be back." The officers assured the Millers that Brian would be questioned thoroughly and that their evidence would strengthen the case against him. "We'll do everything we can to keep your family safe," one of them said as the police drove away. Grace let out a shaky breath. "Do you think that's the last we'll see of him?" she asked. Tom placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll be ready if it's not," he said. "But for now, let's focus on keeping Oliver safe and moving forward." That night, the Millers sat together in the living room, reflecting on the day's events. Oliver played with Charlie on the floor, giggling as the puppy nuzzled his face. The sight filled Grace with a renewed sense of purpose. "We've come so far," she said softly. "No matter what happens, we'll protect him." Tom nodded, his gaze fixed on their son. "Carla trusted us with Oliver because she knew we'd fight for him," he said, "and that's exactly what we'll do." As the family prepared for bed, Charlie settled by Oliver's crib, his watchful eyes scanning the room. Grace bent down to stroke his fur. "Thank you, Charlie," she whispered. "We couldn't do this without you." The puppy wagged his tail, his loyal presence a comforting reminder that they weren't alone in their fight to protect their family. The tension in the Miller household had eased slightly after Brian's removal by the authorities, but the events of that evening lingered in their minds. Grace and Tom knew they had won a battle, but they weren't convinced the war was over. They couldn't shake the feeling that Brian might attempt to reclaim some part of Oliver's life, no matter how fragile his claim was. One morning, a week later, Grace was preparing breakfast when the doorbell rang. Her heart skipped a beat as she instinctively glanced at the security monitor. To her relief, it wasn't Brian, but a woman holding a large envelope. "Mrs. Miller?" the woman asked with a kind smile. "I'm a social worker assigned to review Oliver's custody situation." Grace's stomach twisted. "Custody situation?" she asked. "What do you mean?" The social worker explained that Brian had formally requested a review of the adoption, citing changed circumstances and a desire to be involved in Oliver's life. "It doesn't mean anything will change," she added quickly, seeing Grace's alarmed expression. "But we're required to investigate his claims." Tom joined Grace in the living room, where they sat with the social worker to discuss the situation. Charlie curled up at their feet, his presence a quiet comfort. "We've done everything to provide a loving and stable home for Oliver," Tom said firmly. He's our son in every way that matters." The social worker nodded. "And that's evident from my initial observations. But we'll need to follow the legal process, which includes evaluating Mr. Dempsey's current circumstances." Over the following weeks, the Millers worked tirelessly to gather evidence supporting their case. They compiled photos, medical records, and testimonies from friends and neighbors who had witnessed their unwavering dedication to Oliver's well-being. Grace also wrote a heartfelt letter detailing Carla's final wishes and the deep bond they had formed with Oliver since his arrival. Meanwhile, Charlie's protective instincts intensified. He followed Oliver everywhere, always staying close, as if sensing the family's heightened anxiety. One night, as Grace sat by Oliver's crib, she noticed Charlie staring intently at the window. When she approached, she saw nothing unusual, but Charlie's low growl sent a chill down her spine. The court date arrived on a gray morning, the sky heavy with clouds that mirrored the Millers' apprehension. Grace and Tom walked into the courthouse, hand in hand, with Oliver nestled in Grace's arms and Charlie by their side. The court had granted special permission for the puppy to attend, recognizing his role in Oliver's life. Inside the courtroom, Brian sat with his lawyer, looking polished and composed. It was a stark contrast to the man who had appeared on their doorstep weeks earlier. His lawyer argued that Brian had made significant changes in his life and deserved the chance to be part of his son's upbringing. When it was Grace's turn to speak, she stood with quiet determination. "This isn't just about who has the legal right to Oliver," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside her. "It's about what's best for him. Brian abandoned him when he needed him most. My husband and I have given him the love, stability, and care he deserves. We are his parents, and we will fight to protect him." The judge listened attentively, taking notes as Grace spoke. Tom followed, adding his perspective and emphasizing the steps they had taken to create a safe and nurturing environment for Oliver. As the proceedings continued, a dramatic twist unfolded. The Millers' attorney presented evidence from the private investigator, revealing that Brian's financial and personal stability was far less secure than he had claimed. Furthermore, the investigator uncovered proof that Brian had been in contact with known associates involved in illegal activities. The courtroom fell silent as the evidence was displayed. Brian's composed demeanor cracked, and he exchanged frantic whispers with his lawyer. Grace and Tom exchanged a glance, a flicker of hope igniting between them. The judge called a brief recess to review the new information. During the break, Grace and Tom stepped outside to gather their thoughts. Charlie trotted alongside them, his tail wagging slightly, as if sensing their relief. When the court reconvened, the judge delivered her ruling. Given the compelling evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Dempsey does not currently possess the stability or moral character required to be a positive influence in Oliver's life. The court upholds the adoption and grants full custody to Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Furthermore, a permanent restraining order will be issued to ensure the safety and well-being of the child. The relief was overwhelming. Grace clutched Oliver tightly, tears streaming down her face as Tom wrapped his arms around them both. Charlie barked joyfully, his tail wagging furiously as if celebrating the victory with them. As they left the courthouse, a reporter approached, asking for a comment. Grace paused, her voice steady and filled with gratitude. "This isn't just a victory for our family. It's a reminder that love, dedication, and doing what's right will always prevail." That evening, the Millers returned home to a warm welcome from their friends and neighbors, who had gathered to celebrate the outcome. Linda and Rachel hugged Grace tightly, while Oliver toddled around with Charlie at his heels. The little boy's laughter filled the room, a sound that reminded everyone of the resilience of love and family. Later, as the house grew quiet, Grace and Tom sat on the couch, watching Oliver and Charlie sleep peacefully. "We did it," Grace said softly, her hand resting on Tom's. "We kept our family together." Tom nodded, his gaze fixed on their son. "And we always will." The days following the court's decision felt like a new beginning for the Miller family. The weight of uncertainty had lifted, replaced by a sense of security and gratitude. Their home, once filled with tension and unease, now radiated warmth and hope. Grace stood in the kitchen one sunny morning, watching Oliver play in the backyard with Charlie. The puppy, as energetic as ever, chased Oliver in circles, his tail wagging enthusiastically. Oliver's laughter echoed through the yard, a sound so pure and joyful that it brought tears to Grace's eyes. "Look at them," she said, turning to Tom, who was sipping his coffee at the table. "It's like they're meant to be together." Tom smiled, his gaze following hers. "They are. Charlie's been Oliver's protector from the start. He's not just a pet, he's family." Later that afternoon, Grace decided to write a letter to Carla, Oliver's birth mother. She hadn't heard from her since receiving Oliver, but she felt compelled to share how far their journey had come. In her letter, she described Oliver's growth, his infectious laughter, and the bond he had formed with Charlie. She expressed her gratitude for the trust Carla had placed in them and assured her that Oliver was loved and cherished beyond measure. As she sealed the envelope, Grace felt a sense of closure. While Carla's role in Oliver's life might remain distant, her decision had paved the way for the family they had built. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Tom brought out a photo album he had been working on. "I thought it was time we started documenting our journey," he said, opening it to the first page. Inside were photos of Oliver's milestones, his first steps, his birthday celebration, and candid moments with Charlie. Grace laughed as she flipped through the pages, pointing out silly expressions and heartwarming snapshots. As they turned the final page, Tom revealed a surprise. "There's one more addition," he said, handing Grace a small framed certificate. It was Charlie's official service dog certification. "He's earned it," Tom said with a grin. "He's not just Oliver's companion, he's his guardian." Grace hugged him tightly, overwhelmed by the gesture. He's the best guardian anyone could ask for. With their lives returning to normal, Grace and Tom focused on their future as a family. They made plans to renovate the backyard, creating a safe and fun space for Oliver and Charlie to play. They also started discussing ways to give back to their community, inspired by the support they had received during their journey. One idea stood out: establishing a local program to connect families with rescue animals. "There are so many Charlies out there waiting for a home," Grace said. "If we can help even one family find their perfect companion, it'll be worth it." Tom nodded in agreement. "And we can share our story to show how much love and loyalty a rescue animal can bring." As the months passed, the Miller family continued to thrive. Oliver grew stronger and more independent, his laughter filling every corner of their home. Charlie remained by his side, ever watchful and devoted. The bond between them only deepened, a testament to the power of unconditional love. One summer evening, as the sun set over their backyard, the family sat together on a picnic blanket, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. Oliver leaned against Charlie, his tiny hand resting on the puppy's fur. "Love you, Charlie," he said, softly, his words carrying the innocence and sincerity of a child. Grace and Tom exchanged a smile, their hearts full. They had faced challenges and uncertainties, but they had emerged stronger, united by their love for each other and their commitment to their family. As the scene faded into the twilight, Grace looked at Tom and said, "You know, if someone had told me a year ago that a tiny puppy and a little boy would change our lives forever, I wouldn't have believed them." Tom chuckled. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Grace nodded, her gaze drifting to Oliver and Charlie. "But I wouldn't have it any other way." And if this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join us for more unforgettable tales. Together, let's celebrate the power of love, loyalty, and family. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.